And, okay, Gabby.
Thank you. I have a question for Palmer. I wonder, and I think briefly in your presentation I saw a page, but it disappeared very fast. I'm a naturopath, and I have actually currently a client. Finally, she has always these MS symptoms, but came out always negative, the MRI and such. And finally, recently, she was at UCSF diagnosed with what is it called again? With a autoimmune, what was it called? Sorry, corticobasal syndrome. And what I would like, because I've been working with her for a long time, you know, with the gut and everything. I think I would like her to have some blood tests done that would be like markers. Like I saw you had there were like immunoglobulins, A, G, and M. What kind? I think I saw myelin. What kind of markers or blood test would you recommend to know where, in a way, her approach, like very comprehensive lifestyle approach with stress management, everything, nutrition, everything, to know we're on the right track? That because so far she's slowly progressing over. She has been in my care for over 10 years, very slowly, but still. And I want to know what would be visible to maybe we can tweak something and then have something to monitor. Look, now this is better. Yeah, that's my question.
So big question, as I understand it, you're looking to have tests that can tell where your client is with regard to antibody levels in her blood, whether or not they're attacking particular tissues. Is that right?
Right, and if they do, if there's certain level, so it can be retested in 6 months or
Right.
so, a year, and see if they got lower, you know.
So I'll start with this, and then I'll ask my colleagues to jump in here. I'm most familiar with the Cyrex testing in terms of various panels that they have, maybe 11 different panels. I believe their array number 5 is for multiple autoimmune reactivity, and so it's going to test antibodies against a number of different tissues.
How do you spell Cyrex?
Cyrex is Cyrex labs.com, I think. They also have a very good gluten sensitivity test. That's their array number 3. And then cross-reactive foods that your body thinks are gluten is number 4. They have a leaky gut test. That's array number 2. I wish I didn't know all these things, but I've used them all. And the one that I had done specifically for MS was a neurological panel that was 7X, and that might be applicable to your client. But you can look up their arrays, and I'm also familiar with, from a food perspective, they have their array number 10. I think there are something like 200 foods, somebody can comment on this, but 200 foods that they test both raw and cooked to see if your client may be reacting to particular foods. I've also more recently discovered the Elize ACT test, which is actually measuring your white blood cell response to different foods and antigens, and that may in fact be more helpful in determining what's causing the immune system to overreact. My understanding also on the antibody tests is that sometimes they can be a positive thing to have elevated antibodies, and you may not know which ones are positive and which are negative. So I will ask either of you to comment on.
I don't do a lot of testing for MS, so I don't have anything to say, to add.
I mean, I do testing for, I have a few patients who have MS, but, you know, I do a lot of testing for autoimmunity in general. As far as the autoimmune panels that you were asking about there at Cyrex, I've actually never run those before, partly because a lot of times it's just practical, it's just a matter of cost. But also it doesn't change actually what we're going to be doing. And a couple of patients that I know from other practitioners who've had it also they had positive antibodies to tissues that they didn't know that they had, and became really kind of fearful. You know, like, oh my God, am I going to develop Alzheimer's, and am I going to develop type 1 diabetes? And a lot of this is that we just don't know. And antibodies are so much in flux all the time with the food sensitivity testings. That's why it's so difficult and it's so debated, because you can test somebody one week and the next week the panel looks quite different. There are, you know, for people who have celiac disease or very strong specific triggers, or potentially somebody with MS, right, who has an antibody to myelin, those things are a lot more clear cut. But most of the people in general, when we do these testings, it's very gray. And so you really kind of put it together with the clinical picture. If the patient really wants that and can be motivated by it, I usually say we'll order it. You know, these labs are still done on a small population of patients. And if it's positive, it's a helpful marker we can follow. If it's negative, it doesn't, you still have stuff going on. And so oftentimes, yeah, if it's just positive, it can be a marker.
I will add after that the reason I don't get food allergy testing is most of my clients come in with the testing done, and they have not gotten better by getting more and more testing done. And so, like she was saying, we want to do testing if it's going to impact treatment. And the other thing is I find that by healing the gut, most of these symptoms and allergies go away. I even had a 12-year-old, I started working with him when he was 10, who was mold poisoned for sure and was limed out. And in 2 years, he no longer even needed an EpiPen when he got stung by a bee. His whole immune system had just calmed down, and almost all of his symptoms had gone away, his tics, his nervousness, his autistic behavior. And his mother kept on testing for food allergies, and we saw them go down, 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 such that he was left with one, eggs. And that was valuable because then she knew not to give him eggs. But it was also very expensive, and most people don't have the money to do all the tests in the world that you would like to have done.
This is a question for Elize. So on Monday, a friend of mine was bitten by a tick, and he got a wound that was similar to the photograph that you showed. I think you called it a bullseye wound. And he went and washed it off immediately.
Washed off the tick?
Well, the tick ran away, but he washed the wound.
Okay.
My question to you is, given that this is only a handful of days away,
Run to the doctor and get antibiotics.
even though you said antibiotics don't work?
They do work in the first stages of Lyme, very early. You can prevent the dissemination, and that's why I recommend heavy-duty antibiotics. You do not want to get this disease disseminated.
Anything else? Because I'll call him tomorrow. and let him know.
What I've done preventatively with children is I feed them a product that I carry that has worked tremendously with all of my Lyme patients without exception. And I told this mother to empty the bottle into her daughter's mouth over the course of the next month, and be very aggressive about it. And if she wanted to safeguard, her daughter 4-year-old had gotten bit. Also, go and get some antibiotics.
Okay, thank you.
What's the product?
It's a product called Biocidin.
Can you spell it?
It's exactly as it sounds, Biocidin.
Okay. Another question? Okay.
Did you ever had any experience treating degenerative neurological genetic diseases?
Yes, I had full-fledged dementia. I couldn't read. I couldn't do math.
And no,
I've-
I'm talking about genetic, meaning with the real gene, something like Tay-Sachs.
Have I treated that?
Have you ever had experience, any of you, making any difference in some of the diseases like that?
Yes. using music therapy.
Okay.
Absolutely. And there's thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles substantiating the use of this sort of electromagnetic frequency to affect brain change and to change the neuroplasticity of the brain.
Anybody else want to ask a question? Oh, Rob.
I'm just curious, Elise, rather than just, he's not quite sure the penetration of the Lyme, so rather than just going and blasting the body with antibiotics, isn't there some way to?
If there's a bullseye rash, it's Lyme. That's by definition. You don't need any other tests.
How long should they take the antibiotics?
This question
I
is-
recommend, they recommend antibiotics the doctor will give it to you for 14 days. That's completely insufficient. It's a minimum of 30 days, and I would be longer. If it's a it's an adult, I wouldn't mess with it.
Please discuss the Rife machine, the effectiveness of the Rife for Lyme's.
Rife machines are electromagnetic frequency machines that scan a whole bunch of frequencies that are input into the body over a course of 10, 15, sometimes 5 minutes. If you're really sick, you don't want to do a lot of it, because all organisms vibrate at a particular frequency. Just like when an opera singer sings at a particular frequency, it will break a crystal glass. If you get the right frequency and input it into the body of the pathogen vibrates itself to death. But no matter how you kill the pathogens, you will have debris. And that debris, in other words, the endotoxins and the carcasses, end up clogging your lymphatic system and making it look like you have more symptoms, and you do have more symptoms. So the process of using a Rife machine has to be done very carefully. There are many forms of Rife machine. I use an FDA Class 2 medical device called a frequency-specific medical device. I'm an advanced practitioner of it, and I use it off-label, but it's being used for pain, liver pain, gallbladder pain, neural pain, and I use this actually for at least 4 years daily for 2 to 4 hours a day. I had no chi in me, no energy, no electrons. I was like a skeleton walking or barely walking. And so the frequencies not only were frequencies that could kill organisms, which I did very little. I did mostly frequencies to manage my terrain, to get my liver working, to cause peristalsis, to prevent, to help my blood vessels, which were constantly contracted, open up. There are lots of amazing things that the frequency machine can do the way I use it. A Rife machine simply puts in frequencies for killing, and that's why I don't use a Rife machine per se.
Does this have an, okay, it's on. I contracted Lyme in 1930, my brain. I contracted Lyme disease in 1988, and my kind of rule of thumb is if you have a tick on you and it bit you, you have Lyme disease instantly, because it has a peristaltic motion of, once it bites you, it ingests blood and it spits the Lyme back out into your system as part of how it changes how it changes your body to be able to accept it biting you for a few minutes. So once you've been bit, you have it. Then the question is, how quickly can you treat it before it actually migrates through your system? Once you see a bullseye rash, you're already in serious migration, and at that point, you might be beyond the ability to control it even with a 14-day cycle. And frequently, at least when I contracted it, I was also given a kidney block that allowed the antibiotics to stay in my system long enough to push it through the blood-brain barrier, which is the big issue. You don't want the spirochetes getting to your brain. So if you get bit, get antibiotics immediately and get a big dose of them. If you see the bullseye rash, in my own case, I actually soaked a cloth with tea tree oil and put it over the wound, and about 5 days later, or 3 days later, there was actually, through the skin, it leached out the pattern of the rash, which I thought was wonderful, because it's so caustic that it's ghastly to smell, but it's very effective. So anyway.
I agree with you. The science doesn't support that if you're bit, you have Lyme disease. But I also like packing any bite that I ever get. I have all sorts of packs that I use on the skin to help remove the noxious agent very quickly, and I've seen amazing results. I've used it on a client who was stung by basically a nest of hornets, and his whole body swelled up. And I packed his whole body for like 8 hours. I was able to, it was like you get to the hospital and get some steroids instantly, or this works. And he was fine the next day. It was really quite amazing. Of course, I did a whole bunch of other things. I recommended a whole.
You mentioned the thermal, like, for example, one time I had a cat bite, and one of the things I did to get rid of the problem was I took a pot of water on the stove and I heated it up, and as I was heating it up, I put my hand in it to acclimatize it, and I got it as hot and for as long as I could stand to basically heat shock whatever was there.
In
So
fact, thermal therapy is
yeah.
used to treat cancers. If you get your body temperature up, that's what a fever is about. It's very rare that we see people with fevers now, because most of us, through heavy metal poisoning, just environmental, have a body temperature of about 98 or lower. And without a sufficient body temperature, we don't develop fevers, which is our body's mechanism for burning out these pathogens.
You can do the same thing, put yourself in a bathtub and run the water as hot as you can.
Absolutely.
And especially a friend with, but anyway.
There's detox baths as part of the process of thermal therapy, far infrared therapies, and never getting cold, overdressing all the time.
Okay, we have time for, I think, one more question and answer. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question in front of the group, or I'm getting the, like, no more. Could you make it individually up here then? Just come on up here and do that? Okay, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight and our great speakers and great talks that we had. Thank you. Elize, Palmer, Cynthia. And I want to thank everybody who brought food for us all to enjoy. So if you get give a hand to those people who brought food. Yep. And we need to be out of here by 10 o'clock, so please exit quickly, visit, but if it's after 10, take your visit outside.